Om Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jeevanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadatatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Burida Janaha. So we begin today's class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. In the previous class, we saw how Sri Ramakrishna, after he heard that beautiful song, he went into ecstasy and started dancing. And all the devotees who were present there, they also could not contain their spiritual feeling, or maybe the bhava which they got from Sri Ramakrishna. That was so much that even some of the devotees who were normally not very emotional, even they started dancing and singing and dancing. They all went into a sort of ecstasy, being influenced by the wonderful spiritual state of Sri Ramakrishna. So then we see the conversation between M and Dr. Sarkar. Dr. Sarkar was a person who did not believe in all these mystical experiences. He came to Sri Ramakrishna because he knew that Sri Ramakrishna is a holy man, he is a good person, and he was basically asked to come and treat him. But then he somehow fell in love with this wonderful personality, wonderful childlike personality. And though he did not, his scientific spirit made him doubt everything, even the spiritual experiences. But he knew there was something good about the higher feelings which Sri Ramakrishna was demonstrating. He definitely knew it's not ordinary feeling. There's something noble, there's something very uh, ennobling or high in these experiences, which Sri Ramakrishna not only had it himself, but had the power. It was so contagious that others around would also be influenced by his wonderful state, ecstatic state. And when Sri Ramakrishna somehow, when he saw that M and other disciples, including Dr. Sarkar, were not getting so easily influenced by this, and they were just observing, and perhaps they thought it is their limitation. Maybe they are not fit enough, or maybe they are not spiritual enough to experience that ecstasy. We remember even Narendranath once had made that remark that I see when all this divine singing and the divine kirtan is going on, and you start going into samadhi, bhava samadhi, and that bhava is so contagious that all the people, especially the younger Naren and Bhavanath and all the disciples, they used to immediately Latu, Swami Adbhutananda. So all these disciples would immediately share that ecstatic feeling and themselves go into ecstasy. So that spiritual bliss was somehow Swami Vivekananda was very keen to experience it himself. And so also when Dr. Sarkar told M that I am not getting all these experiences, no doubt it impresses me, but somehow I don't get that feeling. So M explains to him what Sri Ramakrishna had told on an earlier occasion to Swami Vivekananda when he explained to him that when an elephant enters a small pond, there is a big splash. Whereas if the same elephant enters into a big ocean or a big lake, the water is hardly disturbed. You don't notice that. So the spiritual experiences which every sadhaka feels can be absorbed, or a person can be overwhelmed by the spiritual ecstasy and try to express that. But there are some people who contain that or maybe try to suppress that emotion, and use the bhava which is there to enhance their spirituality. So there is a lot of growth within, as Swami Vivekananda used to tell. But they somehow manage to suppress because they are like that vast lake. They have that infinite, they have that vast spiritual capacity which can absorb these small experiences. They wish to have higher and higher experiences. So M is trying to tell Dr. Sarkar, perhaps you are like that, and that's why you don't feel this ecstasy. Maybe you are capable of uh, enjoying greater and greater bliss and experiences. So doctor says, no, I don't deserve that compliment. After all, what is ecstasy? He is talking from a medical point of view. He says, after all, what is ecstasy? It is just a feeling, isn't it? And then there are other feelings too. If love of God and other feelings are deep, some can control them, others cannot. It is just like he just tried to trivialize this experience, and he said, I perhaps don't get it, but I don't believe, I don't deserve the compliment that my spiritual capacity is much more than other people. It's only that I am not emotional. Some people are highly emotional, so they have many other feelings, and love of God also induces a certain kind of feeling. So some people can control them and some people can't control them. That is why you see the manifestation of this ecstasy in some people. So anyway, M then changes the topic. Some explain ecstasy this way, others don't. But sir, ecstasy or love of God is unique. He is trying to say that your your idea that the divine emotion or the spiritual ecstasy that a sadhaka feels is just similar, is something similar to the other feelings which one develop as a human being. As a human being, we are subject to so many feelings. There are feelings of joy, there are feelings of anger, there are feelings of jealousy, there are feelings of frustration. So there are innumerable type of feelings which a human being is subject to. But is love of God just something similar to that? According to Dr. Sarkar, love of God is just another emotion because you are emotional towards your Ishta or some God whom you believe. So you get those feelings. You might get the same feeling if you are attached to some human being as well who is not God. A simple human relationship also would uh, elicit a similar kind of emotion. But M says some explain that way, that it is just a refined or a higher emotion, or maybe it is just a similar emotion, or some people may say it's just a higher or a slightly refined emotion. But according to M, that is not so because Sri Ramakrishna had made very clear that anything that arouses an emotion by by being subject to something gross, that will elicit certain types of emotions in a human being. They cannot be compared with the emotions which one gets when develops a love for God, which is who is pure spirit. If they consider God to be pure spirit, pure Satchidananda, then the Ananda they experience as a result of the bhava, as a result of that intense love, cannot be in any way compared to the human love or human emotion. That is what M is trying to tell. And he says, but sir, ecstasy or love of God is unique. It's not like ordinary human love. There's a huge difference. Human love, just because the object of love is temporary, is transient, the love also will be transient. Whereas the object of worship, our Ishta, if we love the Ishta, considering him to be Brahman himself, the source of bliss, not the reflection of bliss. All the human beings and the whole entire Prakriti reflects a particle of that Ananda, which is known as Sukha. There's a difference between Sukha and Ananda. The Sukha that we see, or the human joy that we experience by coming in contact with the different sense objects, and through the different senses, gross senses, I mean. So that gross enjoyment or even the mental enjoyment which we experience is something totally different when one experiences the same thing, when one experiences the love of one experiences the presence of God, presence of God who is not gross. He is pervading the gross, he is reflected in the gross, but that consciousness is just a reflected consciousness. The consciousness, the Chaitanya that we see in inanimate or even animate, in animate or even inanimate objects, according to Hindu philosophy, according to Vedanta, there is no consciousness is all pervading. Even in unconscious or inanimate objects, this consciousness is there. The only thing is we do not understand that there is a consciousness. Consciousness should not be confused with the life force. Life force is prana. According to the Western idea of consciousness or the medical concept of consciousness, a person is considered to be conscious only if his nervous system conveys it and his brain is functioning, and we can see that life force being manifest. So when we see a person is in a coma, we say he is unconscious, though all the cells of his body, they are running, they are properly functioning, the heart is beating, the cells, each individual cell is performing its own function, so that has some consciousness. So if the human being is considered to be the sum total of all the consciousness, then even in a coma the consciousness doesn't go. But in any case, that is a life force, and that has been given a different name, prana, uh, in Vedanta. The consciousness is that awareness which is seen most reflected in the buddhi. The buddhi is the level, at the level of the Vijnanamaya kosha or the buddhi level, you will find that the reflection is very intense of this consciousness. And that is why if your clarity improves when you start using the buddhi, the discriminative mind, the mind which can discriminate between Shreya and Preya, is what uh, that mind or that buddhi is has more consciousness. More consciousness is reflected, uh, more consciousness is reflected in the buddhi than the lower levels of existence. In the Annamaya kosha it is also reflected, but in a lower way, in a much rudimentary way. In the Pranamaya kosha you will find consciousness is very much tangible. You breathe and do all sorts of actions. It it acts as a motor for our uh, inanimate body. The body which is there, it's an animate body, it becomes animated by prana. So the living force is not consciousness. That's why, so, here he says the emotions which are a result of some manipulations of the nervous system. All the emotions have their source in, according to the Western physiological scientists or even the doctors, medical science. Some of the chemicals give rise to the feeling of pleasure or give rise to the feeling of uh, depression and many other feelings, they say, is a result of the chemical imbalances which we have, physiological chemical imbalances in the body. It cannot be reduced to that, because according to Vedanta, uh, these emotions, they are the functions of the mind, though they need the body to express. In a lower level they need the body to express those emotions, and these are the human feelings. But ecstasy, the higher ecstasy which you see in Sri Ramakrishna and all some of the devotees here, they were not dependent on the body though you see their expression, but it is independent, it is at a much higher level, at the level of the Vijnanamaya kosha or the Anandamaya kosha, which is the innermost core of our personality. So that is why human mind evolves higher. As human mind evolves higher and higher, the joy that he feels or the consciousness also evolves. We say the consciousness evolves higher and higher till it does not depend on the gross body. So that is why here Sri Krishna, here M is trying to, this is a conversation which is going on between M and the doctor. So he says, I saw Stebbing's book on Darwinism in your library. There, when he was waiting for the doctor to come, M uh, had an opportunity to read a book by Stebbing on Darwinism because Darwinism was very popular in those days. So, where Darwin believed that human beings, like all other animals, also evolve. And as they go on biologically evolving, their mental capacities and their uh, nobility and other things, these qualities, they keep on increasing. But Swamiji did not agree fully with that because he said it may be true in the animal world, it may be true in the case of lower animals, but when a human being starts evolving, the evolution takes place in another plane, that is the spiritual plane. It is a higher kind of evolution which has nothing to do with the Annamaya Kosha and the Pranamaya Kosha. They may express, they may be used, they may be containers to express the subtle personality. The subtle body or the subtle personality expresses itself, but they are not dependent. The evolution is not seen in the Annamaya Kosha and the Pranamaya Kosha. You may see its effect, just as we see in the human being, from the amoeba, slowly we find the evolution. The prana performs higher and higher functions as the animals evolve. When you come to the human being, it's a very complicated network of prana, nervous energy, the nervous system, the sympathetic and the autonomous nervous system, which is much more complicated, much more evolved as compared to the animals. We agree with that. Swami Vivekananda agreed with that. But he said, when you talk of spiritual evolution, it is not survival of the fittest. The law of survival of the fittest, which Darwin proposed, that human beings try to evolve and try to become fitter and fitter. It tries to survive, and that is why it evolves. So, Swami Vivekananda said that spiritual evolution is something totally different in that the higher aspects of our personality, the it is a subtle evolution which follows certain different laws. So Stebbing here says whether or not the human mind is the result of evolution or is a special creation of God, it is equally wonderful. So this is a middle path which Stebbing, the philosopher Stebbing, believed in. He illustrated it with the theory of light. He says whether you know or whether or not you know the wave theory of light, whether light is a particle or it is a wave, the light in either case is wonderful. So the expression that we see, the divine love, the the love for God that we see in human beings, he says, is just like this light. We may not be able to explain it, but that doesn't mean that it is not wonderful. So they just uh, come to a conclusion that all we can say about it, our rational mind is not in a position to explain this divine laws. So that is the conclusion. The doctor says yes. And did you see Stebbing accepts Darwinism as well as God? Darwinism, of course, did not believe in the existence of God because according to Darwin, the whole universe is built upon certain scientific principles and animals go on evolving. We started after the Big Bang, there were these preliminary uh, bacteria or some cells which went on evolving. Then they became animals and then invertebrate, vertebrate animals, and then finally they became human beings. So that is the idea which is propounded by Darwin. But there is no place, according to Darwin, there's no need for a god. It is self-evolving universe. So you just have to believe in certain scientific principles like evolution. At least he believed that this was a very satisfactory explanation. But of course, there are fallacies. We'll not enter into that discussion. Anyway, there were some people who tried to reconcile the concept of God as well as evolution. Said evolution, the concept of God doesn't come in the way of the concept of evolution. So if you accept science, you don't have to say that religion is not true or spirituality is not true. Again, the topic changes. This is as far as science is concerned. The topic changes to uh, Sri Ramakrishna. Doctor says, I see that he is a worshipper of Kali. You must remember here that the Brahmo Samaj was not very happy with certain aspects of worship as they were practiced in Hinduism, especially the worship of Kali and other goddesses. They felt it is a tamasic goddess that we are worshipping, and it is not a good thing. One should worship noble. If at all you have to worship a personal god, why can't you worship something which is more beneficial? Why do you worship this? They could not understand. I mean, the Brahmos could not understand the concept of Kali. Why Kali is worshipped and what is the meaning of Kali. So M is trying to explain now what Sri Krishna has explained about the concept of Kali or God, Kali the mother. So doctor says, he see is a worshipper of Kali. M says, what he means by Kali is different. Your idea that a tribal goddess was evolved and she became Kali, that is what the Brahmos and other religions believed. That why do you do this all kind of primitive worship? They thought it is a remnant of some primitive worship which Hinduism is superstitiously holding on to. Beyond that, they do not see any significance of the concept of Kali. So that's why M says what he means by Kali is different. He's just trying to correct. He's just trying to tell Mahendralal Sarkar, who perhaps showed some kind of displeasure that Sri Ramakrishna is worshipping. He could have worshipped some other god or goddess, but why a Kali? So he says what Sri Ramakrishna means by Kali is different. What the Vedas call the Supreme Brahman, Parabrahman, he calls as Kali. So many times before Sri Ramakrishna had mentioned this, and M remembers that, he says when the when Brahman becomes active and his Shakti is nothing but Kali. That's the idea. So Brahman he calls Kali. What the Muslims call as Allah, Christians call as God, he calls as Kali. So it is the one universal truth, the Sat, Chit, and Ananda aspect, which has been uh, considered to be the highest possible definition a human mind can give about God. So, this idea is a unique idea where Sri Krishna says these are the different manifestations of the same divine and are equally capable of taking a sadhaka and helping him to reach that highest state of Satchidananda, which is beyond any second, which is eternal, which is deathless, which is immortal, which is full of bliss. So, what ancient knowers of the Absolute call Brahman, yogis call it the Atman, or devotees call it Bhagavan, and Sri Krishna calls that same reality as Kali. So, you don't have to, he's as if trying to tell Dr. Sarkar, M is trying to tell Dr. Sarkar that he's not worshipping Kali out of superstition. If the Christians can worship God without knowing what he is, or you have the concept of Allah. So these are the some of the concepts of God which other religions believe in. But belief is not enough. It's apart from belief, the idea that God is the supreme being, is all powerful, all knowing, and such other attributes are given to him. So the same God is known as Kali. We have heard this from him. Now he gives a wonderful example which we had discussed earlier. And the same example, parable, is being explained by Dr. Sarkar to M. He says, we have heard this from him. A person had a tub of dye. Anybody wanted his cloth dyed would go to him. The dyer would ask which color the fellow wanted. If the latter said green, he would color it green. And if the Person said he wanted to color the white cloth and give it a red color. He will dip the cloth in the same tub and give the red colored cloth to him after dyeing it. He would dye the cloth in the same tub and say, "Here is your cloth dyed red." He would dye everything, all the colors in the same tub. Seeing this amazing spectacle, a person said to him, "Sir, do you know what color I want? Please give me the color of the dye in your tub." It is the same with Sri Ramakrishna. Now, one person was very intelligent. He saw that Sri Ramakrishna, that person was dyeing the cloth, is dipping the white, pure white cloth in the same tub and giving different colors. So he is surprised. He is curious to know what is this magic. So he says, "Why don't you dye my white cloth in the color of your tub?" So this has a very deep meaning. So it is the same with Sri Ramakrishna. M is trying to explain what it means. Why did Sri Ramakrishna tell this parable? He says he has all these attitudes in him. People come to him with different attitudes, and he helps them. That is why we call Sri Ramakrishna Sarva Deva Devi Swarupaya. So Sarva Deva Devi Swarupaya means we want to see Krishna. We like the aspect of Krishna, or we like Kali, we like Durga. So Sri Ramakrishna says it is fine. So in and through Sri Ramakrishna, we can see the different deities. So because they are not different according to Sri Ramakrishna, they are all different aspects of the same reality. So he says people of all religions find peace and joy in him. Who can comprehend his feeling is or its depth? Just as a person asked, dye me the dye this white cloth in the color which is there in the tub. So to understand Sri Ramakrishna, we have to understand this parable. This parable simply tells us that being an incarnation who is Sarva Dharma Swarupa, who not only practiced all the different religions, but also realized the Supreme in and through different religious practices, including all the sects of Hinduism. So he was in a position to dye the cloth according to the needs of the person. Who, if you want green, he will dye it, give it a green color. If you ask for red, he will give it a red color. So, but if you want to know what is the color of his tub, then you have to go to him and try to understand him. That is what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. Who can comprehend? That is difficult to understand. Is he white? Is he red? Is the color in the tub red or is it blue? Is it green? But he is able to produce different realities because he knows that these different realities, to the external mind, they appear to be different. But basically, behind that is the Supreme Brahman, of which these different realities are the highest manifestation. So it is the highest manifestation possible of Brahman, which is known by the concept of Kali, whether you call it Kali, whether you call it Allah, God, Bhagwan, according to different religions. M is trying to tell that this is why he worshipped all other gods and goddesses, but even his Kali worship uh, is based on the fact that he is trying to worship the Supreme, that which you call Allah, that which you call God, that reality which you call Brahman on the Vedanta or Ishvara, the same thing. If you see different people call that same reality by different names. It is like one can enter the room through different doors and windows if one wants. So some windows may be small, some doors may be big, but all the same, they will give you the same God experience, the same realization if you follow any path with sincerity. That is the idea. Doctor says all things to all men, but this isn't right. Even if Saint Paul says it. Saint Paul's statement is quoting now: all things to all men. That's what Jesus Christ perhaps is promised. that if you come to Jesus, he will give all things to all men. All things to all men means it's just like this parable of uh, the parable says that if you if you ask Sri Ramakrishna, if you ask the person who is dyeing the cloth to dye the cloth in a red color, he does. He uses the same tub, the same dye. He has a special kind of dye which can color you with the color that you want. Similarly, Brahman can manifest himself in different ways and yet not lose the Brahman nature. So, the Brahman itself or the Supreme Lord itself manifests itself in different ways, and he does that by the power of Shakti. So, whether you accept Shakti, which is the manifestation of, so that's why Sri Ramakrishna once said, avatars can only be in the realm of Shakti. Because if as pure Brahman, there cannot be an avatara. If a Shakti has to assume a human body, or Brahman has to come down to the relative plane, then he has to use the power of Shakti to manifest himself in these different forms. So that's why the Upanishad says, in the beginning there was one, and the one thought, let me be many. And then he himself became many. And then he has the capacity to draw all the many into the one. So all things to all men, perhaps Saint Paul means that. So doctor says, this is not right. I don't believe in that. M says, who can fathom his state of mind? We have heard from him that unless you trade in thread, you can't distinguish thread number 40 from thread number 41. The people who are engaged in the trade of thread, or maybe tailors, they are very, they know the moment they feel, they know this is thread number 40, this is thread number 41, depending on the thickness of the thread. So he says, unless you are a trader, unless you trade in thread, unless you know that art, you can't distinguish between 40 and 41, because of the, you can't judge. It is so difficult to judge. Unless you are a painter, you can't appreciate another painter's art. So only a painter can possibly understand what art is. If you don't know art, how can you appreciate others' painting? So also, unless you become like Christ, the experience of a saint is very deep. Unless you become like Christ, you can't truly understand Christ. So Swami Vivekananda told Christians, as he told Hindus also, he told the Christians that if you want to be really Christian in the true sense of the term, then you have to have the Christ experience. If somebody wants to be a Jew, then what Moses said, if Moses saw God, Moses had certain realizations. If you have them, then you have a right to say that you are a Jew. I mean, you are a true Jew if you have the same experience as Moses had, because you are following him. If you are following the uh, path of Vaishnava path, and say that Krishna is my ultimate goal. So the realization which Krishna speaks of, that realization you have to experience. So one constantly thinking of a particular Ishta or a particular aspect of God, you get the realization which is associated with that deity. So that is what this parable of dyeing different cloths, white cloths, into different colors. That is the significance of this parable. And uh, but Dr. Sarkar does not believe in this. Somehow he is reluctant to accept the idea that God can incarnate. He doesn't want to believe, because he says, till I get the proof, I can't believe in it. M says, who can fathom the state of his mind? Can we, with our limited minds, try to understand what Thakur is thinking? How does he make these judgments? Of course, they believed, like Swami Vivekananda believed, that whenever Sri Ramakrishna spoke something, he spoke from a higher conviction, not just based on reason. We try to make judgment based on our limited intellect and limited mind. So whatever our mind's capacity is, we take decisions based on the capacity of the mind. We can't go beyond that. Oh, that's why we make so many mistakes. We don't take every decision perfectly, or to take the right decision, your buddhi should be awakened. So the spiritual path shows that unless the dhi or the buddhi is awakened, that higher consciousness or higher powers of intuition are awakened, it is very difficult to take the right decision at the right time. The power of making choices lies with the uh, power of taking choices in life. It depends on the higher intellect or the buddhi, as it is known. So this intellect, this higher intellect, which is at the level of Vijnanamaya Kosha, helps us to take the right decision and make our life peaceful and meaningful and joyful. So he says, unless you are like Christ, you can't understand Christ. Perhaps the Paramahamsa's Deva's state of realization is the same as what Christ meant when he said, be a perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. So this is a famous quotation of this is a famous quotation where we says of which is there in the Bible, that be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. That means if you have the experience, the God experience, then only one can say that one is spiritual. Otherwise, the religion is an empty word. We may believe in hundreds of things, but unless we experience those truths ourselves in our own lives, we have to struggle to do that. Once we experience, then we can say that we are truly religious. So doctor says, how have you arranged to look after him in his illness? So now doctor is changing the topic because he doesn't believe, he doesn't want to go so deep into spiritual truths. He whatever satisfies him intellectually, he will accept it. And he has definitely a limited intellect. So, with his limited scientific intellect, he's trying to understand uh, the higher spiritual truths, which, according to M, and of which he is quoting from Sri Ramakrishna, that unless you have the Christ experience, you can't be called a Christian in the true sense of the term. So, also when you say Vedanta, the ideas of Vedanta have to be part and parcel of our nervous system, the autonomous or the sympathetic nervous system. That's why Swamiji in his Raj Yoga says the spiritual experience is nothing but the uh, experiences which uh, are translated into, you may say, uh, the nervous association of ideas. We have ideas, but they are not expressed through our body mind complex. We have ideas, the ideas are there in the mind, the ideas there in the intellect, but somehow those ideas do not transform us. When is the transformation complete? When while you are living, when there is this nervous association, every nerve, every part of your body responds to higher truth. These higher spiritual or religious truths, or the spiritual truths as proclaimed by these great prophets, when we really experience it, when our body or our nervous system is capable of uh, acting upon and manifesting those ideas through our body and mind, then only we can say that we have made spiritual progress. So that is after that thing is discussed, the doctor suddenly changes the topic and says, at present, how have you arranged? He's just keen to know that he's treating Sri Krishna. He just wants to know how the disciples are managing to serve him. So he said, at present, an older devotee supervising his nursing every day. Some days it is Girish Babu, some days Ram Babu, some days Balram Basu, some days Suresh Babu, some days Navagopal, and on other days Kali Babu. It is this way. So there are these 6 or 7 people who were constantly taking turns in looking after Sri Ramakrishna's health, because it was very fragile and delicate, and they knew that unless they take good care of his health, of their guru's health, there was no chance that he will live long. So just to see that he improves, because they knew cancer was an incurable disease, but somehow they wanted to prolong his As long as he could stay on this earth, they believed that they will be blessed by his holy company. So they were just trying very hard. And Dr. Sarkar is explained by M how they are taking care by turns. All the devotees are volunteering and taking different, and they are managing through subscription the expenses which Sri Krishna had to incur when he stayed, the rent of the house, Kashipur Garden House where they stayed. They had to leave Dakshineshwar because of the climate or because of the weather there. So this was a much better place. The facilities in Dakshineshwar were not so good. So when he comes here in Calcutta, especially after shifting him to the garden house in Kashipur, which was pretty expensive, it is only after that that his treatment could go on very well. Otherwise, they were struggling both in Dakshineshwar as well as the intermediate home they had in Baranagar, not Baranagar, in Shampukur. In Shampukur, you remember in the last conversation or the last discussion, we described the Shampukur Bhati where Sri Krishna uh, interacted with many devotees, including Girish Ghosh. So that Shampukur Bhati was hired, but since it was not good, they shifted to the Kashipur Garden House. So with the devotees, now the new chapter begins. What what can mere learning do? Again, this topic is coming. While they are talking, the doctor's carriage stops before Shampukur house where Thakur is staying. It is 1 o'clock. Now Thakur is not come to Kashipur, he is still in Shampukur. This conversation took place on 26th October 1885. It was much after that, after a month or so, he was shifted. So the doctor is coming to see him at Shampukur, not in Kashipur. So he says, it is 1 o'clock. Thakur is sitting in a room on the first floor where many devotees, including Girish Ghosh, younger Naren, Sharat, sit in front of him. They are all gazing at the great, ever joyful yogi. They are sitting spellbound like snakes before a charmer, or like the escorts of a bridegroom reveling in a marriage procession. The doctor and M come in, salute him, and sit down. So the M had picked up the doctor, and they were both coming towards Shampukur house, and then they see that Shampukur house already Girish Ghosh, the younger Naren, Sharat, and other devotees are already there. Seeing the doctor, Sri Krishna laughs and says, "I am feeling much better today." In due course, there is a conversation on God. So, just to assure Dr. Sarkar that I am much better than yesterday, I am much better. So, the conversation then turns to God. Every day we found this, though it started with this treatment and all those things, Thakur would not discuss too much about all these things, about secular things, leave alone worldly things. Even he did not, whatever treatment, whatever medicines had to be given, he just took it and he didn't uh, bother to do something more, I mean, waste more time in trying to cure his disease because he knew people are doing their best and whatever happens, I have to accept it. So he was not keen to waste his time, but he was keen to take the topic back to God. So he says the Dr. Ram Narayan and conversation with Banki. Sri Ramakrishna, what is the use? What is what use is mere learning without discrimination and dispassion? I go into a strange mood when I think of the lotus feet of the Lord. Then the cloth I wear on my body drops, and I feel a strange sensation move up from my feet to my head. Then everything appears to me as mere straw. When I see that love for God, uh, when I see that a Pandit is without discrimination and has no love for God, he appears to me just like a dry piece of straw. So Sri Krishna is trying to distinguish between people who believe in certain things, who have a wonderful theoretical knowledge of the spiritual concepts, but they don't have love for God and they are not yearning for the immediate experience of the great spiritual truth. When you love God, the whole process of bhakti helps you to realize or experience God in a much more tangible, in a much more surer way than if you just do through reasoning. Reasoning has its limitations. That's what Sri Krishna is telling. It may confuse you also. Though it is good to reason, but after a certain limit, it is better to practice. It's better to do something and yearn for something which can give you the realization of the experience of the truths that you have read and understood intellectually. That's why he says if a Pandit comes and doesn't have love for God, he doesn't have the yearning to experience the truths, he just comes to explain all these things in a very dry way. Thakur did not like that. Sri Ramakrishna did not like that. Dr. Ram Narayan was reasoning with me when I suddenly went into that mood. I said to him, what are you saying? What can you understand of him with your reason? Or what can you understand of his creation? You have the simple mind of a weaver. Seeing me in that state of mind, he began to cry and stroke my feet. So, Ram Narayan was a simple devotee, but he was also trying when he saw other people discussing about God and philosophy. He also tried. Sri Krishna got very upset. What can you understand with with your reason? It's better to practice spirituality rather than try hard to understand all these things. So doctor says, you see, Dr. Ram Narayan is a Hindu. Besides, he believes in sandal paste and flowers. He is an orthodox Hindu. So, Dr. Sarkar had a different way to judge people. He was not so liberal. He didn't like all these external marks like tilak and all the different rituals. He believed that these are all waste of time. It's better to be altruistic and do some good service to society rather than put all these marks and all. But Sri Ramakrishna never criticized anybody. As long as one is sincere, whether you wear marks or not, whether you believe in symbology or whether you follow any ritual or not, the essence is, do you really love God? If you love God, then it doesn't really matter which ritual you practice, how long you practice, as long as the depth of love, the feeling of the presence of God is there. So that's why he says, Sri Krishna, now since he has come, the doctor said earlier that he had nothing to do with gongs and conch shells. So So Bankim Chandra has also come. Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, the famous writer of Anand Math, where the famous song of freedom, the Rashtriya Geet, not the national anthem, but the Rashtriya Geet, which is Vande Mataram, that was composed by Bankim Chandra. So he also had come. He is already there. He has come on a visit. But Siram Krishna, uh, to doctor. Bankim is one of your pandits. I met him once. So of course, he is not here right now, but he had come, and Sri Krishna is telling the doctor that one of your friends or maybe one of the pandits, Bankim Chandra, because everybody appreciated him or recognized him as a great scholar. So he said, Bankim is one of your pandits. I met him once. I asked him, what is the duty of man? He replied, eating, sleeping, and procreating. When I heard him say this, he fell in my estimation. I said, what are you saying? How low can you get than this? Whatever you think day and night, whatever you do all the time, that comes out of your mouth. When you eat radish, you will belch radish. So it was a big shock because Sharat Chandra Chakravarti, of course, later on he clarifies that he was just joking. But when Thakur asked him, Sri Ramakrishna was very sincere. He did not believe in wasting time. He always believed that one should be very sincere in whatever one does. So he was very keen to know what is your attitude in life. He was not a person who had a very hazy vision of what our attitude in life should be. He firmly believed in certain things, that this is the only goal of life, and he did not tolerate anything. I mean, he did not accept anything lower than that. It's not that he didn't tolerate, he accepted everybody, even people with the lower ideals. But for him, he said, this is my ideal, and I'm telling this based on the experience of all the great religious prophets from time immemorial. They have pointed out to a permanent solution to our worldly problems. And this spiritual path is the only good path which will take you which will help you to get rid of all sorrow on a permanent basis. There's no piecemeal solution here. There's no temporary solution here. The worldly people can give you some temporary solution, but here is a permanent solution. That's why he used to always ask. So naturally, when a scholar came, he just wanted to know. Apart from, he didn't mind if he was writing books or writing novels. Girish also wrote dramas. But Sri Ramakrishna saw to it that he has this as the central goal. He can do everything else, but the central goal of life should be realization of God. That's why he said, what is the duty of man? What is my man supposed to do? That means what should be your attitude? When you say what is the attitude which every human being should have, whether he has it or not, it's a different question. But what is the attitude one should have? And he very casually, he said, what else? Eating, drinking, and procreating. So that means this is what every human being supposed to do. Earn some money, eat, drink, be merry, and uh, create a family, and then die one day after having created children, and maybe if you're lucky enough, grandchildren also. And that is the routine type of life which everybody lives. That is not the goal of life, according to Sri Ramakrishna. So he was very upset that how can a person who is such an intellectual author, such a wonderful person, I mean, such a respected person, he casually says the goal of life is to eat, drink, and be merry and procreate. So he says, how can what are you saying? How low can you get? I mean, he was surprised. This is what animals also do. And being such a great scholar, do you want to go back to the level of animal? Animal also does these things. It eats, drinks, and procreates. So that what is so noble or different in a human being? Can you not recognize that? And then he tells that whatever you eat, suppose you are day and night thinking of money, thinking of uh, all the different worldly things, then you will naturally belch the same thing. If you eat radish, definitely the radish, when you belch, the radish smell will come. So that's why he says, mm, whatever you think day and night, whatever you do all the time comes out of your mouth. Then we had a long conversation about God. After that, Sri Ramakrishna, then though he was upset in the beginning, he tries to slowly explain to Bankim. Then Bankim said, there was devotional music and I danced. Then Bankim said, sir, please visit my home once. Then I replied, Sri Ramakrishna replied, if God wills, then I will come. Then he said, you will find devotees there too. So he's telling that don't worry, you'll find some good people there also. We are not so bad. Then he said, I laughed and said, my dear, what kind of devotees do you have there? Are they like those who cried Gopal, Gopal? Now, this is a wonderful parable we had told earlier. So he's saying, what type of devotees do you have? What type of crowd do you attract in your house? Are they devotees like the ones in the parable where they say Gopal, Gopal? So the doctor is confused. He doesn't know. What does he mean? What does Thakur mean? Then he says, Sri Ramakrishna explains this beautiful parable. This beautiful parable is Sri Ramakrishna told the people to explore, to uh, show to the world how hypocritical people who profess that they are devotees are in this world. So he says a goldsmith had a shop. He was a great devotee, a true Vaishnava with beads around his neck, holy marks on his forehead, and a rosary in his hand. Now, this is very typical of a Rajasic devotee who wants to show that he is not ordinary, he is a devotee. So, instead of really yearning after God, he will be more concerned about the recognition he gets from other people that he is a holy man. So naturally, he has to wear beads around his neck. That means it's a symbol that I am a religious person. If one is a religious person, one has to show it by one's own life and one's own religious practices. You don't have to do it in public or put some symbolic representation is not necessary for the world. Whether you wear beads or not, that doesn't change your status of spirituality. So he also wore holy marks just to show that I am regularly practicing certain rituals. And a rosary also he used to, whether he did japa or not, we don't know, but at least the rosary was in his hand. Everybody would go to that shop thinking that he was such a great devotee. And all, with that, he did his business. Sri Ramakrishna objected, he used to make fun that don't be a devotee like that. You put on all these external signs not because you love God, but because you want to cheat people. So Gopala Gopal means everybody would go to that shop thinking that he was such a great devotee that he would never cheat them. Seeing a party of customers. Now he had some employees and they had a code language. They were not only not devotees, but they were big crooks. They used the name of God to make a code language with which they decided whether one could cheat a customer or not. So even in the cheating, they used these holy words. So he says the customers used to come, and then one of the employees there, one of the people who were selling these goods, craftsmen, they would say, Keshava, Keshava. In Bengali, Keshava means who are they? Who are they? I mean, when some customer comes, one person loudly sound Keshava, Keshava. Actually, Keshava is the name of God, but it was their code word asking. In Bengali, it is a pun, you know. When you say Keshava means who are they? Ke, who are those people? Keshava. So after a while, another would say Gopala, Gopala. The code language was Keshava. When somebody asked an opinion about this person, then another person would study them and they'll say Gopala, Gopala. Gopala here means he is a simpleton. He is a very simple, guileless person. He doesn't have any intelligence. We can easily cheat him. So he's like a Gopala. That's the people make fun, you know. A simple shepherd who's without any education. They call him a Gopala. He's a Gwala. In Hindi, they call Gwala. So it's like a Gopala, Gopala. That means the second person confirms that this person is a simpleton. So we can easily cheat him and give him some inferior goods and make some nice money. Then the another third one would said, Hari Hari. Hari means shall I loot this person? Haran means to loot. So shall I cheat this person? Hari. I mean, shall I loot this person? And the other person says, and finally the boss would say, Hara. Yes, you loot him. So using God's name, Hara is the name of Shiva, Hari is the name of Vishnu, Gopala is also the name of Vishnu, Keshava also is one of the name of God. And with all the religious marks, so Sri Ramakrishna says many devotees are like that. They continue to use God for their to satisfy their worldly needs and even misuse the name of the God, misuse the name of God, and they are so hypocritical that they not only are not spiritual, but they use in a very negative way. They use religion or religious symbology, wearing all the marks and all those things, having a bead and making a show of spirituality so that it can help their business to grow. So, hearing so many names of God in the course of work, the simple customer would naturally say to himself, this goldsmith is of a very high character. But do you know the truth? The fellow who said Keshava Keshava meant to ask, what are they like? The one who said Gopala Gopala would mean that he had assessed them and found them to be a herd of cows. I mean, simpleton. So everybody starts laughing. The one who said Hari Hari meant that if they were just a herd of cows, like cows, herd of cows, should we rob them? And then he who said Hara Hara would mean, yes, do. Since they are just simple like the Gwalas, you please loot them. So that's why this parable, Sri Ramakrishna is trying to convey to Sharat Chandra Chakravarti. When he said, please come to my house, he said, okay, I'll come. And he laughed and he said, okay, what kind of devotees? I hope they are not like these devotees. These devotees. I don't want to come there If there are people who want to use religion as hypocrites or use not spirituality, the external symbols of religion to make a pretense or to pretend that they are devotees and in the process satisfy their desires. So we will conclude today. I already taken more time. So it is 5:40 now. So if there are some questions, we can just have a few questions. Now we have a permanent Zoom account. Uh, so we don't have to disconnect now. And I have given you the link on WhatsApp, which will be the same link, and the it will be there. It will become active. The link will be active at 4:30 p.m. British GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, 4:30 p.m. here and 10 o'clock in India, and respective time zones, the time will be different. But the same link will work, and I've given the schedule of every Sunday, the time will be the same. So try to begin at 4:30. Today, many people were joining a bit late. So if you come at 4:30, then we can close exactly at 5:30. But now we shall have some questions. Yes, if there are. So I'm opening the chat. Is there any question? Well, there is one question. How can we how can we confirm that we are experiencing God? Now, God experience can mean different thing to different people. As Sri Ramakrishna nicely explained, somebody will come and say, I want a green colored cloth. I please dye it green. Somebody else will say, I want red. So the experience of God depends on the conception of God that you have. Depending on the different conceptions of God, people will have different visions. As Swamiji said, none of them are wrong. We are traveling from lower truth to higher truth. So, the conception of God that we have in our mind, the approach, we approach God in a particular way. This is our ideal of God. So, the experience of God will depend on the conception of God you worship. So if you want to experience formless God, God without any form, then you will not be satisfied till you get the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, because there is no form involved there. You just want to experience God without form. But the same God without form can be with form also, as Sri Ramakrishna said. Some people want to see him in Vaikuntha. They have their own conception of God as Vishnu. They want to see him in see God as Vishnu. They want to see see God as Mother Kali. So they have these different conceptions of God, give rise to different experiences, and each experience is valid. But there are two or three signs which can we can use to analyze ourselves. First of all, the ego goes away, because as long as the ego is there, as long as the pakami is there, these experiences cannot be had. If you see somebody says, I have had experience and he is highly egotistic, then there is something wrong. The person who has a real experience will have the nature of a 5-year-old child. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Paramahamsa has the nature of a 5-year-old child. So he slowly and slowly, that is one sign. The second sign is that he is not gross, he is pure. He sticks to a certain standard of purity. One cannot be impure and at the same time have an experience of God. He may have an hallucination, as some people tried to induce a state of God experience by taking drugs. They were not men of good character, they were not maintaining the purity, but at the same time, they wanted to induce. Perhaps they had some experience, they wanted to see God in different forms. Perhaps they might have had the vision or the experience, but that is a hallucination. So, hallucination and God experience are totally different things. So the only way, it is only known to the person who has that experience. And the third and the final thing is that is a huge transformation in the person who has such an experience. You, if you see the person continues to be jealous, to be angry, and to do all sorts of things, even after these experiences, then the experience has no meaning. So these are the four or five things, and then he becomes unselfish. So unselfishness, purity, and you may say a lack of ego, lack of ahankara, all these things can be said to be the signs with which, but it is very difficult for others to judge whether the experience of so and so person is right or wrong. One can only know it from within. When one, and the last characteristic of God vision or experience is peace of mind. So total peace, total bliss, and the capacity, you can say the capacity to take all suffering in a very sporting way and not be affected by the dualities of life. Dualities of life will always be there. If good comes, he was fine. If Thakur's own life, we can see that he had cancer, but that did not stop him from talking about God, that did not stop him from meditating on God, and that did not in any way curtail the amount of bliss he felt whenever he heard these songs. He used to now and then go into samadhi. That is possible only when one can get rid of the ahankara or the ego, one can get rid of the desires, one can become pure as a 5-year-old child, as Sri Ramakrishna explained. These are some of the characteristics. Okay. Acha, yes. Uh, the concept of, there are two very interesting questions. One question is, reason is limited. He says, Maharaj, you said reason is limited. Does that mean that one cannot realize God through Jnana Yoga? Jnana Yoga doesn't totally depend on reason. See, one has a wrong idea. Jnana uses reason as a tool. As Sri Krishna said, reason is like a thorn. You take that thorn and remove the other thorn, and finally you have to throw away that thorn. It is not through reason that you get the experience of God in Jnana Yoga. In Jnana Yoga, Shankaracharya is very clear that one has to have a higher intuitive understanding. It is through intuition, through direct experience, which cannot be denied by any amount of reasoning, which gives uh, one the conviction or the experience, the Brahman experience, as they say. As long as the mind is there, the ego will be there. When the ego goes away, gets dissolves away, when the mind gets dissolved into some in samadhi, it is when you have samadhi, then the experience of Satchidananda takes place. So, Gyan Yoga is a path where you use reason to discriminate between the real and unreal. Reason only helps you to go after the permanent and give up the temporary. Don't run after the gross. It helps you to think of finer and finer things unless and until you have that uh, intuition, and that quantum intuitive jump into something which is beyond reason is the goal of Jnana Yoga. It's not just reason. So reason cannot be the ultimate tool. It is just a preliminary tool. It can help you, take you, as Swamiji says, it can clear the road. It can remove all the dirt and dust. That is, when the road is blocked, first you need a broom to sweep away all the obstacles. Once you sweep away, then your traveling starts. So reason can help us in Jnana Yoga. Reason helps us only to, but after that, it is the intuitive experience of the reality, the experience, direct experience of reality, which gives you knowledge. So the concept of consciousness appears to be too abstract. Can you please elucidate? Is it? totally unquantifiable. Yes. Now, this idea of consciousness to understand, it is a very difficult, maybe on some other day in the Raj Yoga class, I'll try to answer it in great detail. But that consciousness which is limited is not the consciousness we are speaking of. It may be difficult to understand, but you can say what that consciousness is not. If that consciousness is something which is of permanent nature, if you feel that a person has become unconscious, that means you have not understood that consciousness. You're just, the prana has gone out of the body. So if you think consciousness is in the body, as long as he is alive, he is conscious. That is not a, it's a limited idea, it's a reflected consciousness. So you use reason to negate all the experiences of limited consciousnesses which you have. You have a consciousness that you are a male or a female. You have a consciousness that you are rich or poor. We are conscious of so many things, but these are all temporary. These do not describe us fully. I may be rich, I may be poor, but that is not my final definition. I'm something more than that. So, what is that? So, that consciousness that I am rich, I'm poor, I'm an Indian, I'm a global citizen, these are all different levels of consciousness. Or I am a good person, I'm a bad person. So, reflective consciousness just tries to give you an identity. But when you lose your identity in the supreme identity, which is Brahman, then you, the only consciousness remains, because consciousness is something which cannot be destroyed. It is always there, the feeling that I exist, sat, and I know, the feeling that I know, I, it is I who am having this experience. So that is chit, and ananda is that I am full of joy, full of joy in the sense full of bliss. So when the consciousness which we try to attain, if it gives us temporary joy, then it is not the supreme consciousness. When one attains that supreme, when experiences that consciousness, one gets unlimited joy. It is, it cannot be described by the mind, because the moment you use the mind to describe our experiences, we come to the we come to limitations because of the mind, because of the body. So that which is not gross, that which is beyond the gross, beyond the reflected consciousness that you see, that is the pure consciousness. I think I try to make it as easy as possible, but we will discuss this when we come to Rajoga, where this concept of consciousness, which is Purusha, has been discussed in great detail. That very concept of Purusha is the idea of consciousness, because Purusha is the pure consciousness which gives, uh, which makes us experience the world. It is the experience of the experience, the knower of the known. That which is known, something has to be behind that, the substratum which knows all these things. So if we touch that, then we are touching the pure consciousness. Okay. So the last is, this is the last question. I'll end with after that. Namaste Maharaj. Will japa and dhyana help one to gradually let go of the one's ego and acquire love for God? Are there other daily controls that one can adopt to control ego and desires? Oh, japa and dhyana are, it is bhakti yoga and raj yoga. If you want to uh, classify it, then they come under the category, japa comes under the category of bhakti yoga, because japa presupposes that you have some devotion towards the holy name, and the ishta which is represented by that holy name. If there is a holy name, and if the ishta whom you are loving through bhakti yoga, you repeat his name, and that includes Raj Yoga also, because you are reducing the number of different thoughts which are diverting your mind to other things. You are focusing on your Ishta. At the same time, you are loving him. So, Bhakti and Raj Yoga. And then, of course, there is a little bit of knowledge also. And the very fact that you are doing that japa is, you can also term it as Karma Yoga. So, it is possible to get rid of the ego, because when you say japa, you see most of the japa mantras in Indian tradition have this namahan. I worship God. It's not me. I have to, the very process of repeating the mantra, you have to say that it is the God who is within me is real, not the ego. So every repetition of the mantra pre or japa presupposes that you are getting rid of the ego little by little. So that is one path. Dhyana also helps. Dhyana is a direct means. Japa will lead to dhyana. If you can't do dhyana, we go on doing japa. Once you come to a stage where japa is slowly, you jump into the state of meditation. If you see Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, dhyana is the seventh. So even in dhyana, the ego is slightly there. Only in samadhi that ego will go. So there are other daily controls. Definitely there are controls. There is vichara. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, vichara means discriminating between right and wrong. As I told you, our whole life is depending on how we take our decisions from minute to minute. The discriminative Viveka Buddhi should be kept always alive to choose the Shreya and give up the prayer, to choose that which is good and to reject that which is pleasant, that which is just pleasant. It may temporarily give an idea that that is desirable, but then it will uh, continue to give you more and more trouble, and then the ego will increase. So, to control ego and desires, there are different methods. Japa is one of them, but it is a very effective method and a very easy method. It's a very, you can't say it's a preliminary method. The more you sincerely you do japa, it can lead to greater and greater progress. And finally, you can, I mean, you'll be able to get rid of the ego and desires. But the central theme, the central idea behind japa is love for God. So that Sri Ramakrishna used to always emphasize. Why do we do japa? Do we do it as just as a mechanical procedure or a ritual? No. One has to feel every time one repeats the mantra that whatever little ego which is there due to ignorance, the darkness of ignorance which is there in our heart, which makes us see things wrongly, which makes us take wrong decisions, that ego or that desire has is compared with darkness, and the role of mantra is to illuminate that heart and remove that. The very idea is that mananat trayate iti mantra, that which protects you, that which lifts you from sorrow, that which makes you full of joy and peace and illumined, that is japa. So japa, if it is practiced with love for God, love for the Ishta, whose japa you are doing, then it becomes really effective. And faith, of course, with faith that with every repetition, there is some transformation which is going on. Some of the samskaras, the bad samskaras, are getting burnt. In Patanjali, they will say, unless all the samskaras in the chitta, the samskaras which make us take wrong decisions, which give wrong thoughts, they can be neutralized by japa. So japa has many uses. Maybe on some other day we will discuss in detail. In fact, the next issue of Vedanta, I'm going to write. There will be a series of articles on Japa Yoga. Though there is no such yoga as Japa Yoga, it's part of Bhakti Yoga, Raj Yoga. But the concept of Japa, what Japa does, what mantra does, according to the uh, tradition of Tantras, Vedas, and also the different philosophies, the yoga, Tantra, and Vedanta. These are all different schools of Indian thought. Each one has contributed something or the other. The Tantras believe more on the sound symbol, and they more believe more, I mean, they give a lot of importance to this japa. But also Vedanta uh, focuses more on the ideas behind the japa. And we have Raj Yoga, which focuses on the actual practice of the japa, how it helps us to control the mind. So, the beautiful confluence of yoga, karma, that is by doing japa, we are actually doing some kind of karma, and the tantras, which have developed this sound symbology. In Bible also it is said, in the beginning was the word and the word was with God. So lot of importance is given to the spoken word. It is, they are not simple words, they are symbols, very powerful symbols with a bija, which help us to neutralize the samskaras. It's the practical side of spirituality. Our concepts may be clear, but still our samskaras are bothering us every day and night. Our samskaras are propping up, coming up, and giving rise to so many thoughts and desires, and so much trouble, sorrow, and confusion, ignorance. So all these are a result of uncontrolled mind. So uh, if we use japa, the main thing which japa does is to subdue the effect of our samskaras and destroy them, because it's not enough to just press them, it's just not enough to suppress them, but one has to remove it from the root. The samskaras have to be totally destroyed. So that japa can do. So I'll take your leave now. Thank you. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.